But Peter's denial is probably one of the greatest scenes of the Gospels, not only in terms of literature. You know, some people say, oh, the Gospels do not have these great stories like the ones we've been talking about, the judgment of Solomon or the Joseph story and so forth. And they would say, not true. There is Peter's denial, which is in a way the most beautiful story. Peter is all men there. Men cannot resist the mimetic contagion. When you're in a crowd, you become literally possessed by the crowd. The Gospels, one of the things they do from an anthropological viewpoint is to show you that the crowd spirit is all powerful, that only Jesus can conquer it. Is all powerful after Jesus, that it's a real power on earth since it can conquer even Peter, which is pretty disturbing if you regard it as a prophecy too of what will happen at the last time, which it may well be, you know, because right now that's what we are seeing. When people tell you that Christianity must be modern and follow the spirit of the time, what do they say? Follow the crowd, follow advertising, follow, what else could they say? You see, that's why I think we must refrain from following that spirit and listening to these voices, however pious they sound. You see, because Peter's denial is absolutely the amazing thing, you see. And Peter, when he hears the crowd, when he hears the voice of there is one of the Gospels that makes it very clear, that tells us that the servant is young, which I think is a very precious information too. I wouldn't say that Peter is in danger of being sexually seduced and so forth, but she's young, so she has some appeal. Why is it mentioned that she's young? If she were an old woman, maybe she would not get the same response from Peter. Peter has to show her that he's not part of that gang which is being judged and so forth, you know.
Well, the suddenly, part of the Friends of Jesus group, yeah.
That he's a friend of Jesus. He must surrender. And she says another thing which, in my view, is extremely important. She says, anyway, I recognize you because you have that Galilean accent, which is unpopular in Jerusalem. In other words, you're a kind of foreigner. You're not even one of us, you know. You're a stranger. So what does Peter do? He wants to show he's one of them. And the only way you show you're part of a crowd is to join in scapegoating. If I have the same enemy you have, I am one of yours. So you really have, you know, in a very subtle way, indications of what the incentives are for Peter, which are universally human. That's why we must not say, oh, Peter is a special case. He betrays Jesus there because he's a weak individual, really. I don't think he's just the representative of all the apostles, since he's the head, you see. So so I think it's a scene which is absolutely priceless. There is no sociology, you know, and revelation of what living together does to human beings, you see. How come we all have the ideas of our time? You know, not so many centuries ago, everybody automatically believed in God. It didn't mean much. Today, automatically, no one believes in God. But it's purely a mob phenomenon. It's not because there are powerful scientific arguments, you know. It's Peter's denial. That's all it is. The Peter's denial is infinitely more powerful to tell you about what society is, you know, than any other text. Then, at the same time, the idea that Peter doesn't know what he's doing is extremely important. In other words, he's denying, not unconsciously, since he's doing, but he's unconscious of what he's really doing. That's why maybe the most beautiful thing is the ending. Because in order to show unconscious, we say words like unconscious, they don't mean much. But the Gospels know very well how to represent very directly, very understandably, that unconscious. All they have to tell you, and then the cock was heard. And it reminds Peter of what he had conveniently forgotten, which was that Jesus had predicted the very thing that has been happening. And here you can see that the prediction of Jesus is not some kind, of, what should I say, of divine inspiration. You see, because there again, you must, people say, well, Jesus, it's his father who teaches him that Peter is going to deny. Yes, it is his father, but it's also his human knowledge. The fact that he's that because he listens to his father, he understands human communities infinitely better than all these guys, and he knows that Peter is going to find himself in a situation of collective pressure, of mob pressure, in which he will deny. So all we have to do is to say the cock crowed, and Peter started to cry. Peter suddenly, it was not the unconscious in the sense of Freud, he had put it out of his mind, but the cock reminded him, and there it was. So there is one gospel only which does it in a different way, which is less picturesque, but which is the same thing, which is the Gospel of Luke, that has Jesus meet Peter on his way, because he's in the courtyard, and look at Peter. He only has to look at Peter, and Peter understands. It's the same as the cock. So that scene to me is one of the greatest in the Gospels. And it's only a few little touches, it's a few words. When you think about the economy of these texts from a literary viewpoint, how much they can tell you in 3 words, it's just unbelievable. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Then he goes away.
He goes away.
Well, he goes to the tomb. First, they say that he's they get the report that Jesus is risen. Yeah. He runs ahead. He finds it empty. No one there. So he goes away. He goes back to what he was doing before. He goes fishing again. Mm-hmm. And so he's a broken man at that point.
He's a broken man. But at the same time, in a way, it's a second conversion for Peter. And it's a conversion very similar to Paul's conversion. Because what Peter discovered is that exactly the same thing as Paul. But Paul hears from the mouth of Christ, "Why do you persecute me?" In other words, what Peter hears from Jesus is, "You've joined the people who are crucifying me. Even you, And you've done it in the most natural, unconscious way possible, without being aware that you're a kind of criminal. You're not, in a way. You are and you are not. You are forgivable if we understand everything, because you just behave like everybody else. And we all do in one way or another.
So when Peter says to the crowd, the Sanhedrin and the crowd, salvation comes from no one but him.
He knows what he's talking about at this point, after his denial.
That changes everything.
Yeah, that changes everything.